noticed a little difference in configuration tonight. The Davies complained that me and Trisha were having way too much fun sitting next to each other, so Tay had to separate us. So if you guys want to talk to Trisha, like I know I want to talk to Trisha, you guys can post up on the Twitter and the Facebook, and she still gets those things. She's a manager on there too. If you guys want to check out the pictures that I occasionally take with my phone, they're up on Instagram, and they also post up onto Twitter and Facebook as well. So check that out.
All right. Yeah, it does feel weird over here. I get to see a whole different side of things, which is good. Hi, everybody over here.
Hi, Trisha.
Hi, Chris. Go ahead and email me if you'd like, interact@livestreamsonline.net, or text me with your smart or not so smart phone to 714-367-6113, and all questions are totally anonymous. I don't say if you're a guy or a girl. I'm pretty good at that. And the main thing I would like you guys to do tonight, if you don't want to use your phones, we're totally cool with you filling out prayer cards. Or not prayer cards, the comment cards. We would love for you to fill out comments and questions on your cards, and then just kind of hold them up, and somebody over here will come around and get them and bring them over to me. So we just want your questions to be heard.
The one thing we have not changed is the timing and the venue for our prayer time right after this program in the chapel.
Oh, one more thing. Come on over here and check out the lattes. I know Easter is coming up. We have a latte that's being revisited called The Final Week. It's an Easter latte, and it brings you up to Easter. We're going to be releasing a new one, next week, week after, for kids, which is kind of a spin on the final week. It's going to be called The Last 8, which is going to be a really cool devotion for kids and grandchildren. We also have Losing a Loved One, and there's some other ones up here too. We're going to be bringing some more out for you, but come and check out the Easter version.
All right. And if you guys do have a question or a comment that you don't care if we all know who comes from, in the back is Scott, back there by the cameras. Wave, Scott. Scott's got a wireless microphone too, so when we get to the Interact segment, if you don't feel like filling out the card, texting, or emailing, just raise your hand up, try to get Scott's attention, and he can come over with the microphone too. And now let's welcome Pastor Tay to the hot seat that I kind of feel the heat off of a little more since I'm closer.
All right. Well, it's good to see everyone tonight. We're going to continue on. Every Wednesday night we are here together enjoying the wonderful dinner, the time of singing, and now it's the time to get into the Word of God. And live streams, as you know, is inspired by Psalm 1. Hey, check out the new picture, okay? There's a tree that is planted by the streams of water. And that's what the psalmist described the happy man would be like that tree that has its roots right into all that good stuff, the water, the source of life. And so if the tree is planted like that, it becomes so much more stable and strong. And so that's what this is about. It's about putting our roots deep into the Word of God, which would then stream into our lives and make our lives that much better. Well, I want to encourage you to write down your questions and comments too. We're going to go beyond those who are texting, and for those who are not, that's fine. Just write them down on any piece of paper or napkin or whatever, and we'll collect them, or if you want to go live, we'll bring the microphone to you. Well, tonight, we're going to continue our series called Renew Your Relationships. And the series is really for everyone, not just for married folks. And so let's take a look at that summary screen again. It's for married couples. It's also for brothers and sisters, siblings. It's for parent-child relationships. It's for BFFs, too. It's for church people that hang out and spend all kinds of time together, and even neighbors, okay, living on the same street. And, hey, you go to work, you have all kinds of interesting relationships there as well. And so this series is about all those relationships that all of us have in our lives, and the truth is, relationships break down. Okay? Even the good ones, okay? There's no such thing as a perfect relationship, and there's no such thing as kind of like that final stage where you go there and now everything's fine. There's nothing like that, okay? it's always going to be up and down, and you got to kind of work hard. So truth is, relationships do break down. And so this series is about the biblical principles of renewing relationships, or as I've been saying, hit the refresh button, okay? You got to do that every once in a while on your computer. Well, you got to do that in your relationships as well. Now, this series, as you know, is 4 parts, and each part we have been going around the country and talking to experts all around this great country. It's kind of a cross-country conversation we've been having. You guys remember where we went first? Let's look at our itinerary there. We went to Montana, and then where do we go? We went to Iowa, and then where are we going? We're going to Pennsylvania, and then? That's our itinerary, okay? And we're right smack in the middle of it. Let's just take a couple minutes and review real quick. You can treat this like a pop quiz. Let's see if you guys can remember the previous 2 parts. We were, in part 1, in Billings, Montana. You remember? And we talked to the CEO of Peacemaker Ministries. And Peacemaker Ministries is the ministry for reconciliation, making peace, all of that important stuff. And it was great that we were able to talk to the CEO, Dale Pine. And part of the Peacemaker Ministry is they come up with a lot of catchphrases and easy ways for us to remember things. And so we talked with Dale about the 4 steps of making peace. And to make it easy, they call them the 4 what? 4 G's, that's right. And so pop quiz, here we go. What's G number 1? Glorify God. Number 2? Get the log out of your own eye. Number 3? Gently restore. And number 4? Go and be reconciled, okay? And if that's a little fuzzy to you, you guys can go to our website, and all of that stuff is there for you in video form. Now, from Montana, we went to Iowa, and there in Iowa, we spoke to a Christian lawyer who was trained by Peacemaker Ministries, Lori Stewart. And we had a good conversation with her. And we were talking with her about all the wrong ways. Now remember, part 1 was about the right ways, but it's just as important to know the wrong ways, because the Bible's filled with all kinds of bad examples so that you can look at that and say, I don't want to be like that. So Lori and I, we talked about all the wrong ways of dealing with conflict. And you guys remember the 2 large categories, and underneath those 2 were 3 bullet points under them. What was the first large category? It was escape responses. Come on now, it's only been a week, okay? Escape responses or peace faking. What was the first category under escape responses? Denial. Then after that was flight. And then suicide. Then came the next major category. What's the opposite of escape? It would be attack. So now you're not running away, but now you are going after, because now you're just going to win at all costs. Now, both of these are bad, okay? These are the wrong ways. So under attack responses, we also had 3. What was the first one? Assault, then litigation, and then murder. So you can see how the first set is the opposite of the second set. Well, that was a review. You guys didn't do that well in the pop quiz. You're going to have to go back to the website and get a refresher, okay? Well, tonight is part 3, where we focus on the positives again. So there's a method to this madness. Part 1 was positive. Part 2 was negative. We're back to the positives. And tonight, I feel it's important to confirm some important good things about a healthy relationship, okay? So this is about what it really means to have a really good relationship. So can I turn it into a question as we start? What is the essence of a good relationship? What is the true essence of a quality relationship? Tonight, okay, we're going to look at a bunch of scriptures, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of good answers to that. You guys can text them in, write them down on the piece of paper. But we're going to talk about the most foundational, okay? Now, there's a lot of good stuff, okay? And if we opened it up, you're going to shout out a bunch of good things. But there's one thing that is kind of foundational to a good relationship. We're going to confirm that tonight. And in fact, that foundation is going to be, foundational, kind of messing up the sentence here, is foundational to marriage. But those of you who are not married, definitely I'm thinking about you tonight. But let's just confirm, as we're still warming up, that there is a true essence to all good relationships. But the reality, again, is that no matter how good that is, it's still going to break down, okay? So we're going to have to always go back and try to refresh that, because it's always going to be challenged. Now, as I said, we're going to focus on marriage tonight, because marriage kind of is a real intense form of this good relationship, okay? But I have never forgotten the singles or the widows, okay? You're always on my mind, because live streams is always about all the chapters of life, okay? So if you're married, great. If you're not, great. If you're in junior high, great. Doesn't matter, whoever walks through the door, we want you to be able to apply it. So even though I apply it to married folks, I haven't forgotten about singles as well. So you might have never married, or you might have lost a loved one. We're going to think about you tonight as well, okay? So Lord willing, as we talk about it, you will find application for your life as well. And with that, we're going to get back on our jet and go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Anybody been to Pittsburgh? Okay, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there lives one of my close friends, Dr. George Scipione. George and I go back more than 20 years. And this was back when he was living in San Diego, teaching at Westminster Theological Seminary, back in the mid-'80s. That's when I went to seminary. And then George and I continued our friendship after I graduated from seminary. I guess he's a good friend because he accepted the invite to stay up real late. That's Eastern time, all right? And so this is way past his bedtime. He might still be in his pajamas. I don't know. We'll see in a minute, okay? But I appreciate him taking the time to join us. Let's give him a call, all right? George.
Hey, Tay.
Good to see you.
Hey, how are you, brother?
What happened to your goatee?
Well, it's gone.
Okay, nice to see you. First of all, I want to thank you. We have a good crowd here tonight, but then they see you on the big screen. I want to just thank you. It's way past your bedtime, isn't it?
Well, it's 10 o'clock here.
Okay.
The big deal was I was up at 3:30 this morning. So
oh, are you serious?
If I fall asleep, go on without me.
Okay. Well, you know what? We're going to make it short and sweet, about 15 minutes or so, okay?
Great,
so,
no problem.
How's, do you have a lot of snow over there?
They had snow, and I'm in South Carolina now.
Oh, you're in South Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I'm teaching an intensive course down here.
Okay, well, I've told everybody that I forgot. Dr. George Scipione is a professor of biblical counseling at, I forgot now, the Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but you are right now in South Carolina.
Teaching at Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for making the time to join us tonight. George, I want to take a slice out of your book called The Sword and the Shovel. And in that book, pages 72 and following, you kind of lay out what marriage is. And we only have time for about 2 points tonight. But George, you say in that book that marriage is a covenant. Now, a lot of Christians here tonight know kind of what that word means. But can you explain to us what that means? How is marriage a covenant?
Probably the quickest and simplest way, if anyone has any biblical literacy, it would be this. In Ephesians 5, Christ and the church that relationship is called a covenant, the covenant between God and his people. And the marriage is supposed to reflect that covenant. In Proverbs 2 and Malachi 2 in the Old Testament, it's referred to berith in Hebrew, a covenant, which was a ceremony that sealed two people together for life with sanctions, a life and death commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And so our marriage covenant is based on really the covenant between God and his people.
So really, it's there's a lot of relationships, right? But it really is the highest form then of a relationship. Would you say that?
Oh, yes, because some theologians will even talk, there's a covenant between the Father and Son to save his people in eternity. So, it's really reflective of the inner Trinitarian personal relationships in the Godhead. There's lots of implications.
I'm thinking about the wedding day and how on that day, it really is a covenant-making ceremony in the presence of God and before God's people.
That's the old, the old days, that was the kind of term in Christian circles, before God and these witnesses, which kind of reminds you when Paul says, I exhort you before God and Jesus Christ and the elect angels. It's an open universe. God sees these vows. It's not just like a date or something. This is a solemn ceremony where two people are making a life and death commitment for life.
I think the obvious reality is that people seem to have forgotten, even Christians have forgotten the sacredness of those vows. Those are not just, I'll do my best or whatever, but it really is a sacred covenantal arrangement that is being made. Can you comment a little bit about just how crazy it is today that people have just forgotten or they don't understand?
Well, they don't understand because there's no such... we could go on politics. We could go on to business. People don't keep their word. There's no bond anymore. So all relationships begin to unravel because people treat them like designer clothes. Okay, it wears out, I get a new one. I get a new car. And people look at relationships not as life and death serious things, but just throw away. And if it doesn't work, you get something else. That's our culture.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be every culture, every time period, because you mentioned two classic passages. Maybe we could slow down just a little bit. You mentioned Proverbs chapter 2 and Malachi chapter 2, two passages where it was pretty clear that the people there forgot the covenantal arrangement they made before God. Can you comment a little bit more on Proverbs 2 and Malachi 2 that you mentioned there?
Well, Proverbs 2 reflects of a woman who has forgotten her commitment to her husband, which is based on her covenant with God. So adultery in the Old Testament, not only metaphorically, but spiritual adultery, parallels physical adultery. It's that kind of rending of a one-flesh relationship. Malachi is post-exilic, after they come back, and there the Lord's complaining against husbands who are trying to get rid of their wives. He says, you forget that she's your companion of youth by covenant. Mm-hmm. And then the Hebrew word literally is almost a word for abuse. You treat her violently by getting rid of her. So it's these throwaway relationships that we have in modern culture that God says this is no way to treat people.
Okay. Before we go on, I just want to shout out those two verses. If you have your Bibles or you want to go online and look for those passages, it's Proverbs chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, and Malachi chapter 2, verse 14. So I find it easy to remember Proverbs 2, Malachi 2. Those are the two passages that actually uses the word covenant inside it. And so that's why you're turning to those two passages. It's so obvious that marriage is a covenantal arrangement. The one in Proverbs, George, Proverbs 2, actually, doesn't it actually mention the concept of forgetting, the experience of forgetting? Can you comment on that just a little bit? That it was the woman that she has forgotten And that seems to be the case experientially today, where people just flat out have forgotten. Maybe they've been married, 20 years, 30 years or longer, and they've forgotten the serious vows that they have made on their wedding day.
You're right, but I mean, again, that's the way we structure modern life. Everything is so fast-paced, and everything wears out so quickly that the old paths, the old ways, those bonds, they don't mean much to anybody because, you know, our culture's, to exaggerate, is a teenage culture. Young, young, young. You know, renew, just change, change, change. And old age is not respected. Family relationships are not respected. Again, it's a culture that trashes the very nature of human relationships.
So I guess simply put, as we're still in the middle of this conversation, George, we got to really take it to heart and not be like the world and go against it and have that conviction to be against all of that, go back to the Word of God and reestablish that conviction towards marriage.
Amen. I mean, if you take the parallel again, if you look at this way, Tay, public worship on the Lord's Day is a renewal of your love for Jesus Christ. At least it should be. And comes to a height, if you want to say, in communion, where you remember his body and blood, his perfect life and brokenness in your place to bear your sins. And without that kind of renewal, people grow cold. You know, Revelation. You know, you forgot your first love. So this side of heaven, people tend to be forgetful. In the Old Testament, there was like, remember this, set up a memorial stone. You know, wear these things and constantly remind yourself when you get up, when you lie down. And then you're supposed to do that with your children. When you get up, when you lie down, remind them what God says about life. Yeah. Because man, after the fall, is sinfully forgetful.
Yeah, you're talking about the book of Deuteronomy, where remembering is one of the key concepts there. Mm-hmm. George, remind me in about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you again this concept of renewal that you brought up as you used the analogy of how the worship experience is a renewing experience that is our relationship to God. I'm going to ask you in about 5 minutes, well, then how are we going to do that in our marriages? How are we then going to have that renewing type of experience? But you kind of set us up for the next point in your book. Well, the first point, again, is that marriage is a covenant. And then the second point that you make is that marriage is a covenant of companionship. There's a very interesting phrase that we don't hear often. George, where did you get that? I'm assuming in the Bible. Covenant of companionship.
Good guess, Tay.
Tell me, what does that mean, and what passages are you thinking about? Covenant of companionship.
Jesus always talks about marriage. Go back to the beginning. Okay? It's not Princess Bride. You know, remember, go back to the beginning. You know, that's it. No, anyway, go back, what? Genesis. Here's the picture. Non-fallen world, but he's alone. Okay? He's got this mandate to fill the world and to control it and do it and develop it for God's glory. Giraffe won't do. The elephant won't do. There's nobody fit. I think God does it deliberately because Adam goes, hey, there's nobody like me around here. You know, so God makes Eve out of him, and he goes, wow, this is it. This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She's going to be called woman because she's taken Isha, taken out of man. Mm-hmm. And so the whole point is somebody who is a perfect counterpart to complete him in his task of having dominion, having children, worshiping God, being a prophet, you know, being God's, you know, word to bear, and being a king to rule over all this beauty for the glory of God.
Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, I asked you a question about a covenant of companionship, and you haven't specifically answered the question yet, because I know there's passages you're going to bring up that actually mention it, but I like what you're doing. You took me back to Genesis chapter 2, And you're going to use that as a foundation to help us understand the principles of a companionship. That's what you're doing, right? You're laying down that concept, and you're going to give us a couple verses I'm anticipating in a minute. But that's what you're doing, right? You're developing the concept of unity and one flesh out of Genesis 2.
Exactly, because he says, he brings her to him. He says, the bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, cleave or be welded to his wife, and the two become one flesh, one new clan, as it were. And later in those passages, in Malachi, I believe it is, he says, you have or Proverbs, that she's forgot the companion of her youth. And in Proverbs, you know, you're getting rid of your wife, who's your companion from youth, by covenant. So the point is, we're partners together, and it's like a team. Here's the analogy. The husband's the CO, the wife is the XO, you know, military terms, and the kids are privates.
Okay.
He's a 5-star general, she's a 4-star general, and the kids are buck privates.
All right.
That's the way God develops, and new families come out of other families, and they're partners together in this serving of God and serving of other people.
Okay. Just trying to stitch some of this stuff together. You said in your book, this is a covenant of companionship. I asked you, you're getting this concept right out of the scriptures. I'm thinking from Malachi chapter 2 and Proverbs chapter 2 again. We just looked at those passages that talked about the covenant, because that word is actually there in both of those passages. Now you're saying to me, in those same passages, the word companion is also there. So you take the concept of covenant, and I got the concept of companionship. You stitched it together, and you came up with covenant of companionship. But in order to understand it, you went back to Genesis chapter 2 to help us to understand that the essence of companionship is really the unity and the one fleshness that was originally designed in Genesis chapter 2.
Right, and that which was reflected with Adam and Eve walking with God in the garden. There was no breach of sin. There was no disruption.
I mean, that's chapter 3. So, yeah. Okay, so George, with the remaining time that we have, you mentioned about the renewing experience. And actually, the series that we're doing right now is about renewing relationships. And really, the burden that I have tonight is just the fact that relationships do break down. That people do grow distant. They grow tired of each other. And with all of those things, you mentioned the renewing experience. Can you be a little more practical now about how a married couple would do their due diligence to renew the relationships, refresh it? I mean, if they've been married 20, 30 years, I'm thinking it's as harder than ever before because they're so comfortable with each other, or whatever the reason might be, to renew it.
Sure.
So can you talk a little bit about the practice of renewing a relationship?
Yeah. The first thing is that where's the source of all the things that are good? Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, meekness, self-control. Who causes us to be poor in spirit, mourn over our sin, be meek and hunger and thirst after, to be merciful and peace? See, it all comes back to your covenant with God has to be renewed daily because you fight the world and the flesh and the devil daily. And so that becomes the fountain of holiness, in a sense, that renews the husband laying down his wife for the wife, and the wife helping him in his life to have dominion for God, to serve God and serve other people. And in an individualistic society, we forget God comes first, others come second. And it's in that self-sacrifice on a daily basis that the relationship doesn't become dull. You go through the motions, you become kind of an automaton. But, the joy is there. And I think providentially God brings pain. Your kids get sick. They may rebel. Sick, your parents. All these are ways that God reminds us we need grace every day. And as we take grace and we give it away, that brings the bond closer.
George, is it snowing in South Carolina? We're losing you. George, can you hear me? Okay, let's hang in there. Okay.
Time.
Uh-oh. George, I think we lost you. Okay. So one of the things that George was trying to get at, wow, we've lost him. I guess I have to improvise here as I close up tonight. We got about 5 more minutes. Go ahead and write down your questions and your comments. Send in your text at this time. But it looks like we lost him. Huh. Okay? But what he was trying to get at was the importance of the man becoming more like Christ and the woman becoming the suitable helper in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, that God has called her to be. And that in itself is a whole pursuit and understanding, and really a whole series unto itself. Another thing that I'm just thinking where he might go is Hebrews chapter 3. I don't know the exact verse, but it's the verse about visiting each other on a daily basis, because if you don't, your hearts are going to be hard. And so I remember George, many years ago, when he and I did a conference up in San Francisco, he talked a lot about how the husband and wife need to visit each other, spend time together, and lest their hearts grow hard towards one another. Because, you know, you can be in the same house, right? And just like completely just pass each other in the hallways, right? And not even spend any quality time whatsoever. I know one wife, she would always jokingly, although there's a lot of truth in jokes, right? She would jokingly say to her husband, who would be so busy passing by, "Hey, roommate." Okay, that was her joke. But there's truth to that, because she felt like they were just roommates, just renting the house together. And so that can happen to anybody who doesn't spend quality time with your loved one. And so that's a shame that we lost him there, but he needs to get his sleep, right? It was getting late. So let's summarize the 2 points that come from his book. It's called The Sword and the Shovel. The first point was what? Marriage is a covenant. And I wish we had more time to develop the second point, which is marriage is a covenant of companionship. And we didn't have time to fully develop it, but what he was trying to do is trying to talk about how people who forget, people who break relationships, take a look at the screen. He was trying to develop, it's behind that replace the light bulb sign, okay? It's Proverbs chapter 2, which talks about the woman who is considered the wayward wife with her seductive words, who have left, watch, the partner. Now that's the NIV translation, but in the original Hebrew, it's companion of her youth, and ignored the covenant. See, that's why this verse in Proverbs 2 is very significant, because it mentions covenant and it mentions companion as well. What was the other passage that he mentioned tonight? Malachi 2. And in Malachi 2, it says, the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith with her. So you see how Proverbs 2 is about the woman, Malachi 2 is about the man. So now God's taking a shot at both the man and the woman here. In Malachi 2, broken faith with her, though she is your partner. There's the Hebrew word again, companion, the wife of your marriage covenant. So these 2 passages are significant because they mention the word covenant and the word companion. So, what is the essence of marriage? The essence of marriage is companionship. This is the word that is used. Not the watered down companionship like you just hang out, play cards, go bowling together, or watch a movie, okay? But it's a deep down, you see what he was doing? He was going all the way back to Genesis 2, and developing the importance of unity. And I'm sure if he had more time, he would go into the importance of being on the same page and all the practicality that is involved with that. I'm going to just make one more comment. I'm obviously improvising here because we lost him. But go ahead and text in your comments or write down your comments. We do have a live mic back there as well. But I want to say that this word companion in the original Hebrew is a very interesting word. It's actually a word that is used of wild animals. Okay? That word companion in Proverbs 2 especially, and in Malachi 2 is used of wild animals. So for example, look at that. Beautiful, isn't it? But don't get too close, because a wild horse is what? Very dangerous, right? You get too close, you could get kicked, okay? And so this word companion, now you got to stay with me, describes a wild animal that becomes domesticated. Because if you try to get close to a wild horse, that is not very smart, because you could get kicked in the head. So don't get too close. But what if the horse became tamed? What if it became domesticated? Why, at that point, then getting close would not be hard at all. It would be very easy. And so the word, listen, the word in the original Hebrew is especially intensified in Proverbs chapter 2, where that passage where the woman forgot, okay? Because women forget just as much as men. Women leave their marriages just as much as men, okay? Where she forgot about her companion. That word is intensified in there, talking about a wild animal that is now domesticated or tamed. So here's the literal translation of the Hebrew word companion. Look on the screen. One who is tamed. Now that concept has tremendous value for all relationships, whether you are married, whether you are single, whether you are a widow. Here's the point. All relationships, in order to have quality and unity, where you're on the same page, harmony and peace, it involves hard work. Because the process of becoming domesticated, from a wild stallion that wants to kick to becoming tamed and domesticated, that's hard work. It's going to take a breaking of the spirit, that wild stallion spirit inside you. It's got to be tamed. You see where Dr. George was kind of going in that direction about, and he was talking about selfishness and individualism and all that stuff. He was going in that direction. You got to tame that. Once that's tamed, and through hard work and due diligence, and of course, God giving you the strength to do that, then you can have quality relationships in your life. So I like what he was doing. Even though I was looking for practical tips, what he was saying is, hey, you got to look at yourself. It's not like you practice one step, second step, third step, and then now you live happily ever after. But you got to look at yourself, your selfishness, your sin tendencies, all of these things. He was quoting Galatians chapter 5, right? All the fruit of the Spirit. All the things that you got to do in order to get yourself right. That's the process of spiritual domestication. Then you can have a relationship. So you know what? Stop blaming your spouse. Stop blaming your boyfriend. Stop blaming your girlfriend, and stop blaming your best friend. You got to take a hard look at yourself and deal with the wild, sinful tendencies inside you in order to get your relationships right before God. That is the covenant of companionship based on Proverbs chapter 2, Malachi chapter 2. Go ahead and put those two verses in your mind and meditate on God's calling for you to have quality relationships in your life. Well, it's time for us to spend a little time together. Let's interact. Go ahead and send in your text, your comments. David, I apologize last week. I didn't give you a chance to talk.
Oh, I had some pearls too. Golly,
I'm sure you cried all week. Sorry about that.
But I have one today.
Okay.
Dr. George said interestingly, he said, renew your relationship daily with the Lord. You said, renew your relationship with your wife daily. Don't just be a roommate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said it's really hard work. Now, the why? Why daily? What breaks that relationship? Then I thought of Ephesians you were getting to earlier that, hey, we're in spiritual warfare with Satan. And he was seeking whom he can devour. And that's what breaks that relationship unless we're holding God's hand, unless we're holding that wife's hand.
If you're going to keep going this direction of daily pursuits, daily experiences, what have you, I mean, even Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, I mean, pick up the cross and, deny yourself daily. And so the Christian life is never reaching a point where you can kind of relax and put it on cruise control. You don't reach that point because it's always up and down. It's Peter 1 minute so strong that he said, I'll never deny you. And then the very next moment, rooster crows and he denies Jesus 3 times. Well, before that, he fell asleep 3 times too, right, in the garden. So, it's an up and down process. It's the fluctuations of the Christian life, okay, back and forth, okay.
Anybody have any thoughts or questions?
Okay. We got one in the back. Somebody bring that up.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Scott's out there with the mic if you guys raise your hand if you guys want the mic. Wow.
Who had the question? Your wife
There you
has
go.
the question.
Okay. Okay, so we've covered in part 1 how to make peace, part 2 the wrong ways of dealing with conflict, and tonight I wanted to at least get in this concept of a covenantal relationship and the sacredness of it, but as George was developing, how hard it is and how you have to keep working at it in order to do so. Karina.
Well, I was thinking here that it's important to develop similar relationships throughout our lives, right?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Can I hear you? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
That the things that
We
we
can
have
hear
been
you.
talking about between husband and wife can be also important to develop similar relationship with your own children throughout our lives, to keep their relationship to God and the parents all open. And it kind of, it has happened because I have a big family and I had all my life to raise them for the Lord, and we are very close. And I don't know what I would do if they were not Christians, but I have to deal with them when they became Christians early in their lives. So.
Definitely. I mean, the principles that we're laying down here when we began this series, I said it's for every relationship in your life. And so no matter what relationship it is, we just happen to be highlighting marriage because it's hard to avoid marriage as one of the higher forms of relationship. But as you can see, even marriage, when you really examine all the relational obligations and what have you, many of those principles can be applied to other relationships as well. I mean, when George was talking about, the fruit of the Spirit, that's not just husband and wife, right? I mean, that's just friend to friend. It can be anybody. And so definitely the principles that we're talking about here, we just happen to be talking about marriage, which is important to learn. But as Dave, you were even going in that direction too, by just talking about the general responsibility that we have in all relationships to renew them, because all of them can break apart as well. Okay?
But especially in marriage.
Especially because you're living under the same roof. It is one of the more difficult ones. Yes.
I was a wedding director for 12 years. I participated in about over 2,000 weddings, and I got to know people very well after that. I got to know the families sometimes along with the couples, and it's amazing. I would find it usually the people who came to the wedding were couple that were getting married. I could tell what they were going to be like. And I could also tell, I asked myself, why are you getting married? A lot of them didn't have a Christian background. They just liked the building to be married in. And it really bothered me. There was one couple that I don't know if I did something wrong, but his wife was an alcoholic. The doctor told her to take a drink after dinner to calm her down. And she was hiding liquor in her clothes and all sorts of places. And she told her husband, her fiancé at that time, I will quit drinking after I get married. And I said, you know, that's really not the way to go. And I didn't say too much, but anyway, then the guest came the day of the wedding with all the gifts and everything, and he'd called it off. And I didn't know if I should feel guilty or just how I should feel about it. But it's amazing the number of people that get married that don't know each other, have no spiritual values. And there were so many divorces that the photographers were getting the money right after the wedding pictures were taken instead of waiting until after the honeymoon, because there were so many people that weren't together after they came back from the honeymoon.
Yeah. And so that's why you can see Dr. George, where he was going after, 30, 40 years of counseling. He just saw that, you notice what he was doing. He was emphasizing individualism, selfishness. Nancy, I'm sure that's what you were seeing, especially at weddings where everybody's got their own agenda. They're pushing it on other people. Everybody has expectations, from brides to grooms to mother-in-laws to everyone. When it all comes down to it, it's James chapter 4, where James says in verse 1, what causes quarrels among you? Does it not come from the desires of your heart? That's not a good thing. Your evil, selfish desires, your sinful desires. Go back to even part 1 in this series, where Dale Pine, when he was going over the 4 G's, what was the 4th G? Go and be reconciled, right? That means 3 G's prior to that dealt with you. Dealt with you and what you needed to do to get yourself right, check your heart, get the log out of your own eye, right? All of that stuff, getting your motives right before you can gently restore, G number 3. And so there's definitely a lot of introspection that needs to occur. Looking at your own heart before you point a finger at somebody else, okay? Mm-hmm. So quite frankly, even though this is a series on renewing your relationship, when this is all said and done, it's going to be about you looking at yourself and checking your own heart and recognizing what you are doing in order to break down a relationship, especially if, and now this is the last thing I'm going to say as I set you up for next week, especially if your relationship has gone through some really difficult times. And now you got all these terrible memories. And it's hard to move on when you have all those bitter memories and terrible things, and you can't forget. Next week is about painful memories. And how do you move on when you're still so angry, so bitter, and still so hurt? And so we're going to come back to California next week on our cross-country tour. And it's going to be a very important one. I want to encourage you to all come out with your friends and family as we talk about painful memories. This is something that you don't hear taught. And so this is a special opportunity we have with one of the foremost authorities in this whole country and, in fact, around the world. Dr. Ernie Baker will be joining us to talk about that. And so hopefully God will be glorified as we talk about that. But again, it's about looking at your own heart and how you can deal with this as you get ready to continue to renew your relationships. And so with that, that's it for tonight. A few minutes behind schedule. Thanks for being patient. We have a prayer meeting tonight. There are prayer cards in the back. Go ahead and quickly fill it out. But go to the prayer meeting. It's in the small chapel, or please stay and help us clean up, okay? We'll see you guys. Bye-bye.